As you may already know, the orchestral sounds, or tones as they are more formally called, on the FR-4X are configurable by you. That is, you can define what tones will play from each register button within each set. And on a standard instrument from the factory, you can choose from an internal sampled sound library of 179 different tones. You can even edit them as well, without requiring any special programming. Yes, you can use Roland's editor software to do this, and some people find that more convenient, but you don't have to. You can do it all simple enough right on the instrument itself. Let's suppose you would like the default startup set, the one that comes up automatically when you first turn a brand new instrument on, to contain different orchestral tones than the ones that Roland defined. Note that I have just completed a factory set reset operation on this instrument, restoring all sets to their original condition as they existed when it was brand new, shipped from the factory. Let me turn the instrument on. The default set, called Hello 4X, set 001, appears. I will now activate the orchestral sounds. By default, register button number 1 is automatically selected. Notice how it produces a piano sound. Register button number 2, an electric piano. Register button number 3, steel drums. You don't have to learn these sounds by trial and error. You'll find a chart on page 10 of your owner's manual that tells you what sounds will be selected at each register button location. But of course, with 179 possibilities available within the instrument, and only 14 register button locations within one set, the likelihood that Roland has chosen the very same tones that you would prefer, or placed them at the same register button locations that you would have wanted them to be, is very unlikely. That is a fact of life on any modern electronic musical instrument that contains more available sounds than there are buttons. For example, on my BK9 keyboard, there are 10 favorite tone buttons that Roland has configured by default. But it didn't take me long to change them to tones that are more to my own preference. Same thing on the FR-4X. Let me go back to register button number 1. And then I'll press the right arrow button to activate a special orchestra part tone screen. This screen is described on page 19 of the reference manual. In this screen, I can use the plus and minus buttons to define the tone that I want by number. And again, I don't have to use trial and error. As with most of today's electronic musical instruments, Roland publishes a tone list document, which you can use as a guide. Let me redefine this tone at register button number 1 to Roland's famous clarinet sound, which I see in the tone list document is tone 122. It turns out that this is the same tone that Roland defined in the standard chart on page 10 of the owner's manual for register button number 13. But I prefer it to be at register button number 1. At register button number 2, I'll choose tone 117, tenor sax 1. At register button number 3, I'll choose tone 121, French horn. At register button number 4, tone 115, trombone. Register button number 5, tone 124, flute 2. Register button number 6, tone 126, oboe. Register button number 7, tone 94, a human chorus sound. Now, of course, if you are new to the instrument, you would want to take some time to listen to the various tones. The internal sampled sound library offers several choices for each popular instrument, like sax and flute. You'll want to listen to all your options before deciding which one you like best. It's easy enough to do. You can play them all directly with the display showing the orchestra part tone screen, as you have just seen me do. Like most electronic musical instruments, I am allowed to make all the changes I want without worry that I am permanently affecting the instrument. I have affected active memory, but not permanent memory. It is only when I formally save what I have done that my changes become permanent. And of course, if I don't formally save, then I will lose all my configuration changes when I turn the power off. Although I have not yet performed any editing to my selected tones, now would be a good time to formalize their selection. To do that, I press and hold the menu button. The display indicates that the instrument will perform a system save, but I want to do a set save operation, so I press the plus button. At this point, if I press the right arrow button, the instrument will ask me to what set and what sections of set memory I wish to save. But since I have made changes to only one section of set 001 in active memory, and since I want to save to permanent memory of the same set 001, I can simply press and hold the right arrow button, which will by default save all sections. I can watch as the titles of the data sections scroll by until I am finally asked to confirm. I confirm by pressing the Yes button. I can now turn my instrument off and back on. And the orchestral tones in set 001, Hello 4x, will now be redefined to my preference. Now that wasn't hard, was it? So, changing the orchestral sounds or tones on the FR-4X's startup set is not difficult at all. Of course, to save time in this video, I configured only register buttons 1 through 7 on the treble side. Doing it on the bass side is similar. Anyway, in today's world of electronic musical instruments, assigning favorite tones is considered standard operating practice. Of course, if you have never owned an electronic instrument, you might fear that it will be challenging to learn how. So perhaps you think it's valuable, at least initially, to have such adjustments made for you by someone else when you purchase the instrument. But again, with so many internal tones to choose from, if you are just now purchasing your FR-4X, and especially if it is your first electronic accordion, without a decent amount of exposure to the instrument, it's unlikely that even you would know what your favorite tones will be. At Roxy's, rather than configure the startup orchestral tones on your instrument, and in the process limit you to someone else's selections, we feel it is better to give you all the information you need in the form of instructional DVDs to accomplish the selection yourself, and in the process help you realize the full potential of your own instrument. Well, what about editing your favorite startup orchestral tones? Some people will have you believe that in order for your instrument to sound decent, you need to spend many hours making intricate adjustments that require not only the use of complex software, but years of experience in orchestration. Well, I'm sure experience in music is an advantage. But what did you think of the tones that I just played? Were they acceptable to you? They were completely unedited. The fact is, Roland's sampled sounds, not only on the V-Accordion, but on their entire line of electronic musical instruments is world famous for their quality. Of course, in the world of music, various individual musicians will always have their own preferences. Yet, for every Yamaha diehard that I meet, I can find you another who is just as dedicated to Roland's sample sounds. Still, over time, you may feel the urge to perform some basic editing on your instrument's orchestral tones to make them sound more to your preference. Well, it turns out to be not as complex as these people would have you believe. And although Roland's editor software can be used, and some people prefer that method, it can also be entirely done right on the instrument itself, as I will show. If I am already in the orchestra part tone screen that I demonstrated earlier, I press the menu button and I am immediately presented with the Orchestra Edit menu. You will find the full list of all editing possibilities within this menu on page 53 through 55 of the reference manual. To enter the menu, I press, you guessed it, the Enter button. I then use the right arrow button to navigate through all the various editing possibilities. The first one is called octave. For the clarinet tone, I can change the octave to -1 for a fuller, more woody sound. Listen to the change. Here it is at the default value 0. Here it is at -1. Pretty neat, don't you think? One editing feature that I recently heard people talk about, a feature that is generally called sustain, is available on the 4X under the name release. Essentially, this adjustment causes the sound of each note to sustain or continue for some period of time after the button or key is released. To get to it, I press the right arrow button 7 times. Allow me to demonstrate using my trombone sound at register button number 4. Initially, its value is 0, meaning that it is not in effect. The sound immediately stops when I release a key. Picking a high value will make its effect obvious. You see, the sound sustains beyond my release of the key and slowly decays. It creates the same effect as the partial pedaling technique on the damper pedal of an acoustic piano, but a lot easier to accomplish for the reason that the instrument does it for you automatically. Some people like the effect because it allows them to play legato more easily. Legato means playing the notes closely connected together, as opposed to detached or even staccato. But of course, this high value for this editing parameter, although good for me to use to help you understand the effect, is much too much to be practical for normal playing. You see, the notes all run together. However, a more conservative value can be quite usable. Many V-accordionists like to use this effect on the bass side, where they have a tendency to pump or staccato the buttons. Also, I suspect that the effect may work better for certain tones. My trombone example was fine for explaining how the effect works, but perhaps not so good a candidate for actual playing. I can understand how a person who has played electronic instruments for many years might develop a fondness for having the instrument give each note a little extra sustain on the release, especially on the bass side. It makes the instrument easier to play. However, an acoustic player who has already developed the playing habit of holding the buttons down for as long as required by the music might not like it. When presented with an electronic instrument configured for extra sustain, their normal playing habit might cause notes to run together a bit too much, as I demonstrated earlier. But my purpose here is not to discuss the appropriateness of using this release, also called sustain feature. Rather, it's simply to demonstrate that adding extra sustain to your orchestral tones does not require special software. It can be accomplished right on the instrument, and you can easily do it yourself. One effect that many people like to play with when they first start to experiment with editing sounds on an electronic musical instrument is vibrato, or as some people say, vibrato. It's a kind of warbling effect. Some of your FR-4X's orchestral tones already possess a certain amount of it as part of their original sampling. An example is the clarinet sound. Let me return to it at register button number 1, where I assigned it. If I play a sequence of notes, I don't notice anything special beyond the typical sound of a clarinet. However, if I press and hold a note, after about a quarter second, I perceive that it is not a pure, steady note, but rather it starts to warble in and out ever so slightly and at a very slow rate. If you cannot perceive it, I recommend that you listen using a pair of studio quality headphones. But you must listen carefully, because the effect is very slight. Well, it turns out that like most modern electronic instruments, the FR-4X has the onboard digital processors necessary to achieve the vibrato effect, and you can therefore edit it into any tone that does not have it as part of its original sampling. For demonstration purposes, it's best that I pick a tone that produces very pure notes, like the flute that I assigned to register button number 5. Since I am already at the release item in the Orchestra Edit menu, I can navigate to vibrato by pressing the right arrow button 3 times. There are 3 parameters that control the effect. The first, called vibrato delay, defines the amount of time after first pressing a note for the effect to begin. That is, for the warble to start. For demonstration purposes, I will use a value of 3. I press the right arrow button again to navigate to vibrato depth. This parameter controls how much or how strong the warble will be. For demonstration purposes, I will specify a value that is probably too much. Finally, I press the right arrow button one more time to specify vibrato rate. This parameter controls how quickly the warble goes in and out. To start, I will pick 4. Now listen as I press and hold a note. Do you hear that? But the secret to using such effects is to not overdo it. So let me back off on the vibrato depth a bit. And let me reduce the vibrato rate. What do you think of that? Well, of course, my demonstration of vibrato editing was only for teaching purposes. I'm not claiming to be an orchestration expert. I'm just a technician. You're the musician. So I will leave it to you to decide which tones on your 4X to apply the vibrato effect to. But for educational purposes, let's suppose that I would like to keep my vibrato editing on this tone. Of course, so far, my editing applies only to active memory. To make it available the next time I turn my instrument on, I must save to permanent memory. But wait, I have also done some editing to the trombone and clarinet tones as well, remember? Suppose I decide that I don't want to keep them. I want to keep just the vibrato editing on the flute tone. No problem. When I invoke the set save operation, I will change the orchestra organ set data category such that only the edits to register button number 5 will be saved. Watch as I do it. I press and hold the menu button, then the plus button to get to the Save Set operation, and the right arrow button to increment through each data section until I get to the orchestra organ section, at which point I select register button number 5, then the right arrow button to go through all other data sections, and the yes button to confirm. There, now that wasn't hard, was it? But the fact of the matter is, at Roxy's, we do not actually feel it important to set up your instrument ahead of time to have certain tones at the instrument's default startup set. It turns out that set is not even representative of a typical accordion. For example, you will notice that it possesses 6 musette reed combinations. You see, the default startup set, the one called Hello 4x, is more a demonstration set to impress you with the sounds of the instrument when you first get it. With Roxy's DVD instruction, you will learn that the standard sets, the ones that contain traditional reed combinations, the ones that you are most likely to want to use, start at set 20 and continue to set 48. And we encourage you to assign your own orchestral tones not to the default startup set, but to the standard sets. It is even a simple matter to configure the instrument to start up at any set of your choosing. For example, you can make it start up on set 36, Ciao Rome. And the DVDs that Roxy's provides show you how to do these things step by step at a pace that is even easier than what you have seen in this video. So, if you are looking for a dealer who, rather than just set it up to play certain tones when you first get it, will actually help you master the instrument, give Roxy's a call.